was a time when I was sure that you and I were truly one, that our future was forever and would never come undone. And we came so close to being close, and though you cared for me, there's distance in your eyes tonight, so we're not meant to.
Folks, today is a new movie of the week, but instead of being a movie of the week, it's going to be movies of the week. But because it is the Christmas season, I thought we'd talk about one specific story that has been adapted several times. What am I talking about? It is A Christmas Carol. Now we're going to take a look at, see how many versions we got here. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 adaptations. And it would include this Christmas Carol with the original Alastair Sim. There was Scrooge, A Christmas Carol with George C. Scott, Scrooged, The Muppet Christmas Carol, and also Mickey's Christmas Carol and Disney's Christmas Carol. So, quite a few movies we're going to talk about. Now, these movies in particular, I chose these adaptations because these are ones that actually played in the theater. Regardless, one in particular did play on television here in the United States, but it did play in the theater in the UK, so I would count that. But I'm not counting the Patrick Stewart adaptation because that was just a made-for-TV film, so I'm not counting that. Plus, there's several direct-to-video cartoons and things like that. It's those I tend to want to avoid. But first off, we'll kick things off with the original Alastair Sim, A Christmas Carol.
Well, the first film we're going to take a look at here is the Alastair Sim version. That Alastair Sim was the actor who played Scrooge in the original A Christmas Carol. Even though you see the graphic here that says Scrooge, that is because when the film was released in the UK, the film was not titled A Christmas Carol. It was titled Scrooge. However, for the United States release, which was released by United Artists here in the United States, it was released under the title A Christmas Carol. This film is probably the most faithful adaptation of A Christmas Carol you will ever find on film. The ghosts are actually treated like ghosts, as you would see. Like Marley here is actually a composited image of two different films. This one is each of these films we're going to talk about are each have some interesting things about them that separates them and makes them their own unique thing. And now this one is the only one that you will ever see Scrooge and Marley as apprentices or as colleagues, as businessmen colleagues. This is the only film adaptation that does that. Otherwise, it's shown as just, that it's just talked about that Marley and Scrooge were partners. However, this film actually shows it, and it shows the business that they were in and some of the debates and things like that they were dealing with the people. And so this is the only film that shows that. And coincidentally, each film, like I said, has its own take of what happens to Scrooge. And now, but however, this one was the first one to ever show that, the business dealings between Marley and Scrooge. Now, obviously, the ghosts seem to be portrayed in a very similar manner. Like the Ghost of Christmas Past is, like a light or an angel or a candle-like character. The Ghost of Christmas Present is, a jolly man in a green robe, kind of like a Santa Claus-like character. And of course, Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come is portrayed in something that is, cloaked and very dark looking. But yeah, this is probably the most faithful film adaptation that you will ever see of the classic Dickens novel. And probably the best. I will say that. You can't judge it just because it's in black and white. It doesn't have it doesn't have any color. The story definitely holds up. And as you will see throughout the different versions, they'll each be faithful but have their own take.
Yeah, this is the one that tends to be the more faithful, the more, the first definitive movie about when you see A Christmas Carol. Now, another interesting thing about this, the screenplay I didn't mention in the clip you just saw. The screenplay was written by a man by the name of Noel Langley. For those of you who don't know who Noel Langley is, would the movie The Wizard of Oz ring a bell to you? Of course, it took several screenwriters for The Wizard of Oz, but Noel Langley made some key contributions to that movie, including Dorothy's ruby slippers. In the book is a different color, but he changed them to ruby. But yeah, the original 1951 A Christmas Carol.
Our next adaptation is a 1970 film starring Albert Finney as Scrooge, in the title role called Scrooge. That's the title of the film. This was originally released by a film company now defunct called Cinema Center Films. Their rights are now picked up by CBS, CBS Broadcasting and Paramount Pictures. And this film, of course, stars Albert Finney, a.k.a. Daddy Warbucks from Annie. And this film, I find his performance a little strange. It's a long... For some reason, I can't picture this adaptation, this guy who's on screen playing Scrooge, later becoming Daddy Warbucks. I'm just looking at, the actor himself. Another interesting thing about this film is that it's also a musical. And there's some very bizarre things that's in this film, even though it is faithfully telling the story, that we all know to expect from A Christmas Carol. But there's they added a lot of things to this story, and it's really strange. Just Albert Finney's performance as Scrooge is strange enough, because we know that Scrooge was a mean old man, and I feel that Albert Finney is really overplaying it. I really think that, just based on his facial expressions, he's like, it just based on his performance, I just don't buy it as much as I do the other films. Of course, an interesting take on this adaptation. This would be the first that's actually a musical, and the music is sadly kind of forgettable. There's not one memorable musical part in this film, except for one little scene I'll show coming up. That's the only thing that I can really point out, and it's really, really strange. This is just a strange adaptation of the Dickens novel. Like this right here, he's talking to the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, and there's the scene coming up here. I'm not gonna let the audio play for various reasons. But the reason being, I'm showing this, going to show this clip, is because they are actually, the people were kind of, they depict it in the novel and in other adaptations of the story, of course on film, is that the people were actually kind of glad that this man was gone. See, well, here's the scene right here. This man that is singing, and Scrooge is singing, he's kind of bobbing up and down and dancing. The man is actually on top of Scrooge's coffin. Now, here's another thing that makes this adaptation so strange, is that this is the only adaptation that shows the consequences of Scrooge if Scrooge keeps pursuing a life of greed and hate. As you can see, the ghost of Marley is right here, showing him his personal hell. He's actually taken him to hell and showed what it would have been like. Now here we're obviously now to the Christmas Day, and now I have no problem taking this story as a musical, but it just seems that the whole performance of this film was just so strange. Of course, this was another big budget British production of the films or of the story. So it's just real. This one's just really, really strange, and it's kind of one I just like to not watch as much.
Yeah, this film, Scrooge, I wouldn't say it's an entirely throwaway, but it's not one of my particular favorites. It's one I'm not going to say I don't want this in the collection or anything like that, but this was, a lot of people would look at this one, to watch. And of course, it is a faithful adaptation of the story, but if you want a musical, and so knock your socks off. There's Scrooge. All right, next up, we're going to talk about Disney's Mickey's Christmas Carol.
So in 1983, the Walt Disney Company starts to put out their first adaptation of A Christmas Carol. This would be one of 3 adaptations, the first being Mickey's Christmas Carol. However, some critics have went on to say that this was a pale story because Mickey is not the center of attention. As you can see, it is Scrooge. Of course, it is Scrooge, but it's not Scrooge is not played by Mickey. He's played by this new character they had just created, known later on in the DuckTales series as Scrooge McDuck. This movie is a short film. This was originally released in 1983, tacked on to the beginning of a re-release of Walt Disney's The Rescuers. This scene would seem familiar coming up, a reason why it has a little flaw with it.
Pounds, 10 shillings from Macduff, plus his 80% interest, compounded daily. Money, money, money.
But anyway, as you can see there, you notice that the Scrooge McDuck's little telltales are coming out in that version. That's the only problem I have with it, is that it is of course it is a Disney adaptation, but it adds a little bit more, the characters that we know, adds their personality to it, and I guess that's what you're supposed to do. But with Scrooge McDuck, his whole thing with the DuckTales cartoon series is that he was in love with his money and his money bin. So they incorporated a little bit of that into this film. This film was tacked on, again, like I said, it was tacked on to the beginning of the re-release of a Walt Disney film made back in the 1970s called The Rescuers. However, it is a charming film. It's a very short film. It's only 25 minutes in length. So it does kind of skip over a lot of things. Definitely it definitely goes into more, Scrooge's impact on, with Marley and with the Bob Cratchit. But it's still a heartwarming tale that Disney has told. Just a little thing, just little things that just make a good story. And plus, the reason why this was released was because it was the first brand new Mickey Mouse cartoon that had been released in 30 years. This was just shortly, had not been made since Walt died. But I think that this makes the movie any more special that it is a heartwarming Christmas tale that can be shared, over and over, even though sometimes it is a little forgotten.
I gotta say with this one, a little bit more interesting facts about this one. This movie did play, like I said before, a reissue of The Rescuers. I do think it's a charming story, obviously, but this was played. The reason why this became so famous was not because of its theatrical play, but it was aired on television about every Christmas season. Disney had, first of all, they were with the contract with NBC, and so NBC played, Disney content, and every Christmas they had to play this, and they called it the Wonderful World of Disney, but it was NBC couldn't call it that, but it was just Disney Presents or something like that. But this is what they would play, and they would play a few cartoons for that special evening. Yeah, that's how I watched it, and of course, this was the days of, you could tape things off TV, and I watched it quite a bit on television, and of course, taped off TV. So this one does tend to be a favorite, even though it's kind of a short version. It's only 26 minutes. And some people complained about this Blu-ray edition. They don't think the transfer's that great. Reason being is because I think Disney has probably lost all the original animation cells. See, when Disney brings an animated movie back onto Blu-ray and DVD, they actually go through and reanimate the whole thing. They dig up, especially stuff like The Lion King or The Little Mermaid. How those transfers came out so good is because they dug up all the animation cells, all the backgrounds, rephotographed them using high definition cameras instead of film cameras. But I think what they've done is just that they didn't have the original animation cells or anything like that, so they had to use a film transfer. So, and that's like making a copy of a copy of a copy using analog technology. It's only going to go as good as the technology, as film is going to go. Film is superior over video, but when you duplicate it, it degrades in quality. So in order to preserve the quality, they probably had to use some DNR, digital noise reduction, to make the picture as good as can be.
Next up on the list is the 1984 version of A Christmas Carol, starring the one and only George C. Scott. Now, this film is a little bit different because in this film did not play in the United States theatrically. This film, however, was shown theatrically in the UK. It was shown to the American audiences on television. It aired on CBS in 1984. Of course, George C. Scott here plays an interesting Scrooge. He does portray Scrooge as, the mean old man with, he doesn't want this to happen, and he's not, he portrays it definitely as, he hates everybody, and there's not much going on for him. But also, this film is almost a direct copy of the 1951 version. But however, there is some differences in the film, which I'll get into later. This one seems to, go into more the traditions. Like this example, this scene right here I've taken where the Ghost of Christmas Present is showing Scrooge, look what he's missing out on, definitely. And, some of the holiday festivities and the games and the traditions that he's really missing out on, and how really it does matter it matters differently to some people. And there's a really good atmosphere here that is portrayed with George C. Scott in the film. Of course, this story is just a great story. Regardless if this was even shown on television, I know I'm trying to stick with the theatrical motion picture adaptations, but the fact is this did play in the theater, just not in the United States. It played in Great Britain because it was a big production for the UK, and so definitely it was shown in the UK as a theatrical motion picture. But the movie was so good to the UK that eventually we here in the United States did eventually see this film on television as a Christmas special that aired on CBS. So, yeah, there's the 1984 George C. Scott adaptation of A Christmas Carol.
Yeah, this adaptation of A Christmas Carol with George C. Scott. George C. Scott is really good as Scrooge in this. I will say this. Even though I felt like this one is kind of copied of the original Alastair Sim version. I want to say Alameda Slim, but it's not. That's not correct. Alastair Sim. But this film was the one that played on television here in the U.S., but in the UK and Britain, it played theatrically. But which I'm counting because that is a theatrical release. But also, the film's director was an editor or something on the original Christmas Carol with Alastair Sim. So some of that is getting transported over into this. I guess it's not a throwaway film. It is a charming film. It's a good telling of the story, and so on and so forth. George C. Scott version of A Christmas Carol. You can get this on Blu-ray as well. Unfortunately, it's on it's on DVD as well. But it's only in full screen, so probably because that was the way it was released. It may have been released in 1.8.5 theatrically, but I think they're trying to preserve I don't know if they're trying to preserve the USA cut, or I don't know what's going on there.
Now, this next adaptation is a real fun one, I think, and it's very original on how the whole Charles Dickens story is told. It's basic, and to put it, it's Bill Murray and Scrooge, directed by Richard Donner, released by Paramount Pictures in, I believe, 1988. Of course, it's a little bit different. It's set, modern day, 1980s. How a Scrooge would be today. So they have Bill Murray play this character who's a television executive. He runs this big network called IBC. I think it's supposed to be a take on NBC, but he's kind of a jerk. And like Scrooge, he encounters the three ghosts. And, of course, an old business partner of his comes back as a ghost and forewarns him if he doesn't change his ways that it's going to be bad. And In this film, he doesn't go by the name Scrooge. He goes by the name of Frank Cross. And it's a very, very funny adaptation. It's very, very, very funny and just out and out fun to watch. Because this guy, he definitely makes good of himself, and it's just a funny movie. But it also has very faithful things that are in the Charles Dickens novel. And, of course, the three ghosts, but there's also just the people and, how he makes good within his heart. So, yeah, this is just a fun one. And, of course, the scene with the Bobcat Goldthwait, and it's Carol Kane as the Ghost of Christmas Present. And it's just a wonderful movie, and there's an all-star cast in the film, and of course there's a few cameos by some famous actors of television and screen, and it's just a fun movie.
Scrooged is just one of those movies that it's a total 80s fun, and I think it's an interesting thing about this movie is that it is an adaptation of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. It's set in the 1980s. The dialogue is very sharp and witty for its time. But what's interesting about this film is that it centers around an adaptation of A Christmas Carol, and the station that Bill Murray's in charge of, that are responsible for putting on this famous stage play that they air on television of A Christmas Carol every year, and this is the first year that he's in charge of it. He's the youngest television executive. It's the first time that he's put in charge of this whole production, and it just kind of falls apart on him. But yeah, do check out Scrooged. It is a classic. Now the last two, of course, will be two Disney releases. So let's get on to the number 2 of the Disney adaptation.
The next adaptation we have up here is the second Disney adaptation, along with Jim Henson Productions. It's The Muppet Christmas Carol. This came out in 1992, and it has, the Muppets doing their own adaptation, and of course they star in, play the various characters, and with Michael Caine as Scrooge in this film. Some interesting things about this film is that when this film came out on home video, it was an uncut version that was released on home video due to some creative differences between Brian Henson, who was directing the film, and Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was the president and CEO of Walt Disney Pictures at the time. And unfortunately, on the Blu-ray version is the theatrical cut. And the only way that you can see the uncut version is if you have the DVD version, and it unfortunately is also in the full screen format. It's a very humorous telling of the tale. And of course, and then another interesting thing is, one, it's a musical, and two, Gonzo plays Charles Dickens, and he narrates the whole entire thing with Rizzo at his side, also providing a little bit of humor to the whole thing. And it's a very humorous and very faithful telling of the Charles Dickens story. It's a very entertaining film. The Muppet Christmas Carol.
A Muppet Christmas Carol really was a favorite of mine on VHS when I got it. I didn't get it the year that it was released, but I had seen it several times though. Disappointment with this Blu-ray release though. was the deleted scene, because when they released the VHS, first of all, I never saw it in the theater, so I never saw the theatrical cut until, this Blu-ray release, my brother had the DVD release, which had a similar thing, but they had also issued the VHS version, the VHS cut on DVD as well. However, it's not included in this. That deleted scene is basically a song, because this movie is also as a musical adaptation as well. What it's missing is a song of Scrooge's love interest, Belle. It's a song of her saying goodbye, and the song's called "When Love Is Gone." What's interesting about the theatrical cut is, though that song is cut, it still appears in the ending credits with country singer Martina McBride singing it. So why have a song in the end credits that you've taken out of the story? And like I said, Brian Henson and Jeffrey Katzenberg debated this. And so the studio got their wish, and they cut out the theatrical version. But for home video, it was placed back in. I guess the difference was, the creative differences was that they felt that it slowed down the movie, and that they thought it was too depressing. So, and it is a depressing scene, because Scrooge finds himself crying, and he's very upset about what he has seen, because he realizes at that point he is a fool. And yeah, it's just a real disappointment that it is included. I shouldn't say it isn't included, but it is included in here. But it's not cut in. It's a bonus feature. It's a deleted scene. So yeah, go figure. But anyway, it's still a very good movie. It's only how the Muppets could tell it. Very, very similar to Mickey's Christmas Carol, and where you have the Muppets playing the various different characters, like Kermit is playing Bob Cratchit, like Mickey was playing Bob Cratchit, and Gonzo is actually Charles Dickens, and it's just a fun movie. And of course, Statler and Waldorf is Jacob and Robert Marley. So it's not just Marley's ghost, it's two Marleys, it's brothers. That's what's really the really big difference, is that it's now the Marleys instead of Marley. And of course that counts as Disney, as Disney's Muppet Christmas Carol, and even at the time, it was released under Walt Disney Pictures in 1992. Walt Disney had bought Jim Henson Productions, and so everything that Jim Henson was going to be released was released through Walt Disney. So, but then everything got turned over to Sony a few years later. Then the Disney buys specifically the Muppets. And so that's why this came out in a nice Blu-ray edition, because they had, matter of fact, they were going to release the new Muppet movie at the time. So now for the final film.
And finally, last but not least, the third adaptation from Disney is Disney's A Christmas Carol, starring Jim Carrey, directed by Robert Zemeckis, Film was released in 2009 and came out to Blu-ray and DVD in 2010. Now, what's interesting about this film, this is actually a very, very faithful adaptation of A Christmas Carol. However, I do think in some cases, in some parts of this film, they made it a very, very frightening film. They actually took advantage of the fact that this is a ghost story. And one of the things to keep in mind is that it is a ghost story, and it's how to change this man's heart. And one of the things I found was really, really kind of intense for this film was that every time that the ghost, especially a Ghost of Christmas Past and the Ghost of Christmas Present, transitioned, their transitions were very, very frightening. I found it to be very, very frightening. However, the film does take advantage of 3D. It was one of the first 3D films I ever saw. Matter of fact, it was the first 3D film I ever saw in the Real D 3D format, unfortunately, which is a good 3D format, but I was not able to see it in the IMAX format. But Jim Carrey plays a wonderful Scrooge. Of course, this is all motion capture, and it's a very, very faithful story, or faithful adaptation to a great, great story. And it definitely is a story that warrants the 3D animation and 3D graphics of a movie. And it's just very, very well done. It's one of my particular favorite adaptations, actually.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Disney's A Christmas Carol starring Jim Carrey. I thought they did a really good adaptation of this story. And I think Bob Zemeckis, in a way, he kind of said through other movies that he really wanted to direct A Christmas Carol, because especially around Back to the Future, because they were talking, like in the commentary, he lists A Christmas Carol as one of the best time travel stories. It was The Time Machine and A Christmas Carol, in which it's Scrooge going through time. It's going past, present, and future. And so who else could you get but Jim Carrey to play Scrooge? The film, surprisingly, I said in the comments, I found this film kind of frightening at moments. And rightfully so, because I remember going to see this in the theater, and like I said before, this was the first 3D movie I ever saw in the new digital format, Real D 3D, it's specifically. But I remember me and my brother walking out of the film judging the rating, because I couldn't remember if it was rated G or rated PG, because I said, if this is rated G, they are really pushing the limits here, because some of the stuff that they were showing was very frightening. Now, the other adaptations had, I'll point out a couple things. The Ghost of Christmas Past and the Ghost of Christmas Present, the way they transition out is kind of intense in this film. And because there's a shot of the Ghost of Christmas Past right before Scrooge puts the horn onto him to douse his light. The light is looking at him, showing the different faces of his past. They morph into the different faces, like the different faces between his old boss, school teacher, sister, and it just morphs into different faces, and it's kind of freaks you out a little bit. And then the Ghost of Christmas Present, when he dies, of course, ages really fast, and he's laughing hysterically, and he goes, and it just, till his laughter just stops. Plus, this is the only Disney adaptation to show the Ghost of Christmas Present. In a couple of the other adaptations, they show the two children hidden underneath his cloak. This is the first Disney adaptation to show that. The other Disney adaptations never shown that, because it is kind of frightening. The adaptations that have that show the two children ignorance and want. When it shows them in this, it has them kind of decrepit looking children, and at one point they jump forward at Scrooge and they become men and women. They age really fast, become from child to man. It's really intense. And of course there is some funny things. There's Bob Zemeckis. I'm actually talking more about this than I did in the clip, but Bob Zemeckis did say it is a faithful adaptation. I agree with him. It is a faithful adaptation, but they said there is specific things that they added in to make it to go for the more 3D, because they knew the film was going to be released in Real D 3D and IMAX 3D, so they had to put some scenes that were not necessarily depicted in the book into the movie, to make things just kind of jump out at you. And so, yeah, wonderful adaptation. I know it gets played several times throughout the Christmas season on ABC Family and probably the Disney Channel, but yeah, I really enjoyed this movie, and of course several of the other adaptations I really do enjoy. I think it's a really good story. It's a good story about redemption, that greed can be greed is a very, very horrible thing. It's, it is a extreme sin, but it shows what happens to this man, that the man is really a good-hearted man who needs new life into him. And it just shows that no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, you can be saved from hell. That's the whole moral of the message, is that it's not, if you are breathing right now, it's not too late to change. So that's my take on the different adaptations of A Christmas Carol. These are the ones that I can think of that played theatrically, but these are the ones I have. But you may have your own favorite, and personally, I think I would go between the original and Scrooged and A Disney Christmas Carol. And so those are the ones I would go through. So from me to you, see you later.